Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. We're just going to give it about another 3 to 5 minutes before we get started. We're just waiting for more folks to join. So we'll give it about 5 minutes and we will get started. As I said earlier, we are just waiting for more folks to join our session. And then we'll kick the session as scheduled. Hello. The session will be starting soon. As I said, we're just waiting another 3 more minutes for folks to join us. We're going to start in about 3 minutes. Please stand by. Good morning, Oliver. You're able to join. I know it's 2 a.m. where you are. Good morning. All right, we're starting in 1 minute.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. We are so pleased to bring to your attention our special two-day online international conference on social and emotional learning in context. This conference is co-organized by the Amakim Foundation in Morocco and NISM Networking to integrate SDG Target 4.7 and social emotional learning skills into educational materials, which I am a member of. My name is Sarah Ibrahimi, and I will be moderating this first session of our second day. I'm so pleased today to welcome two distinguished speakers who will be entertaining our session. There was a slight change to the program, so we're going to start with Dr. Esther Kerr, follow up with Ms. Burju Meltemarik, and then from then we'll be showing a video of Dr. Malay, a video that was interrupted yesterday, so we'll be able to show that again this morning. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and present our present for this session. The layout of the session is we're given 8 minutes to each presenter. We can even go since the presentation will just be an online video. So up to 20 minutes. And after the first two presentations, we can have a Q&A session, and then we'll end our session this morning with you from Dr. Régis Mallet. And yeah, if you have any questions, please, you can funnel them through the chat directly to me, or feel free just to unmute during the Q&A session and ask the questions directly. So I know Dr. Esther Kerr comes to us from Australia, but currently is in Nairobi. Dr. Esther Kerr works with the government and non-government organizations on education reform with a focus on the 21st century skills and assessment. She coordinated the pilot of a new indicator of SDG 4.7 and works with APCEIU on global citizenship education in Asia. She's currently technical team lead with the LIVE initiative in East Africa on assessment of life skills and values through across Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. From a career in academia spanning over 20 years at the University of Melbourne, she's the author of publications focused on 21st century skills, as well as psychoeducational assessment for education system reform and collaborative problem solving. Welcome aboard, Dr. Esther, and then we will follow up with Ms. Burju Meltemarik. She comes to us from Turkey, but currently in Cyprus. Ms. Burju has been the Education Observatory Coordinator of ERI since 2017. She's also Vice President of Roots and Shoots Turkey, a board member of Network of Education Policy Centers, and a member of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Commission on Education and Communication, co-author of the Councils of Europe, T-Kit 13, Sustainability for Youth Work, and T-Kit 11, Mosaic, the training kit for Euro-Mediterranean youth work books. Ms. Burju lectured ecological literacy and sustainability and biomimicry courses in Istanbul at Istanbul Belgium University between 2015 and 2020. She has a BS in chemistry and an MA on climate change education policy. So I'll start with the focus of the presentation of Dr. Esther, and then before Dr. Burju takes the floor, I'll give you an abstract of the presentation. So Dr. Esther today will be talking about the large number of national systems that are increasingly moving their competency-based curriculum goals beyond specific subjects to include a variety of other human competencies. This includes the lack of understanding of the competencies themselves, whether they're referred to as generic skills, life skills, sensory skills, or other, and of information about how integration of cross-cutting or transferable competencies into curriculum teaching and learning. Dr. Esther, the floor is yours. You can test the sound, and you're now able to share your screen, and we can get started.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And I'm just picking up on whether I'm sharing right screen, and I hope that I am.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Excellent. Right, good morning, everyone. It's thank you very much, Sarah, for that introduction. And I quite like the fact that we have a room that feels like you can actually talk to people rather than not doing so. So this morning, as Sarah said, I want to talk a little bit about how national systems are moving into adoption of a lot of these different competencies that we're all talking about in many different ways, and talk about what blocks the uptake of some of these. So I'll move through, and if for any reason my connection falls apart, I know that Sarah also has the presentation. So if that does happen, I'll come back in on the phone and trust that Sarah can show the presentation. So here we go. What you can see here is a map that I know some of you may have seen before. So some years ago when I was working with the Brookings Institution, we looked at mapping the degree to which a broad set of skills were being incorporated into different countries' national education systems. So we called it at the time breadth of skills, BREADTH, breadth, because one of the big problems that has been facing us, whether it's social emotional learning, 21st century skills or whatever, is the fact that we refer to all of these things in such different ways. And that seems to be a bit of an issue. So anyway, in this mapping, we referred to anything that was not sort of traditionally academic in terms of subject-specific curricula as falling under the umbrella of breadth of skills. What you can see in this map are the different degrees of integration of these sorts of competencies or values, according to the degree of integration into curriculum. Now, this was desk research, so it wasn't backed up by finding out what was actually happening on the ground in classrooms, and that's a really big reservation to take into consideration. What you can see there is those that are not included in the research. In other words, we couldn't at that stage access information from those countries. That might be because they didn't have information up on their websites. It could have been some language problems, various things. So those that are not included in the research could reasonably also be integrating these competencies, but we just did not know at that stage. And then we were able to access some where it was pretty clear that they were not adopting any of these sort of competencies as far as we could see from the online documentation. Then we come to the coloured pieces. So we've got the pale red, the medium and the heavy. And the pale one are all of those countries or national education systems that were actually espousing social, emotional or cognitive skills and proficiencies and values in their curricular statements of aspiration. So that's the first thing. It's like a marker. When we start looking, though, inside the curriculum documents of those countries, we find that not all of them have actually reflected that aspiration into the curriculum. So in other words, what a teacher sees in terms of a curriculum framework or what a teacher sees in terms of subject syllabus integration of the skills, it's just not there. And then the next level, the deepest level we went to was skills progressions. So what we were looking for here is information that shows us that a system is considering the fact that skills progress from simple to advanced, and that therefore you would expect some different descriptions of competency levels across different age or grade levels. And so we've referred to those here as skills progressions. So very much like a curriculum where we would look for growth. Say if you think about basic numeracy to much more advanced, or basic science concepts to more advanced, you have a curriculum that shows those increasing proficiencies. We were looking for the same in terms of description of different levels of expectation of proficiencies of our learners. And you can see that by the time we get to that level, very few countries were actually mentioning some concept of skills progression. So in other words, a country might say, yes, we're focused on problem solving, but they wouldn't really give much more information about what exactly that means or what the different expectations would mean. Notwithstanding, from our survey, over 160 countries were aspiring to inclusion of these sorts of competencies. So that implies a major shift in learning goals globally. It doesn't say that it's actually happening, but it does say that it's on the agenda, and that's a start. But the point that we took from this also was that just looking at curriculum or curricular documents, integrating this stuff into curriculum is not enough. I hope you can still see this, because I just got a message on my thing that my iPad just disconnected. So let me know. Can you see it still?
Yeah, we can still see it.
Oh, great. Okay, fine. That's good then. I'll just let it be. So changing curriculum is not enough. That was the big learning. And the other thing was that terminology remains a problem. That because we have different individuals, different interest groups, different countries referring to similar concepts in different ways, makes it a little bit difficult to know exactly what's going on. So now you should be able to see the next slide. Is that true? You can see commonality in East Africa?
Yes, it's working.
Great. Lovely. All right. So, oops. Okay.
Now we got disconnected. Do you want me to go ahead and just share mine, Dr.
Yes.
Esther?
Yeah, if you would. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looks like we're just not strong enough in terms of the connectivities here.
Yeah, absolutely. I can go ahead and share my screen.
Lovely. And there's nothing fancy in it. It's all straightforward slides, so we should be fine.
Recording stopped.
So just let me know when you've got that back up again.
Yeah. Are you able to see my screen?
I can. Thank you. Excellent. All right. So now we're on commonality. And the reason that I want to talk about this particular set of information is because, notwithstanding this issue that I'm raising about differences in terminology that make it difficult for us to communicate about some of these competencies, we can find in certain regions that there is an effort to try to bring these together. And so we can see progress, for example, here in East Africa, where Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda have been working together through a conglomerate called ALIVE, which is Assessment of Life Skills and Values in East Africa. And within the work that ALIVE has been doing, we've been looking at the curriculum across these three countries and looking at how they're going about integrating the competencies. And so here you can see this word cloud, which shows both social, emotional, and cognitive competencies. And the other area that they're looking at, of course, is values. And so we can have countries understanding across them what is common. They might refer to them differently with umbrella terms, but the actual skills or competencies themselves are similar. So, for example, in Kenya, these are referred to as core competencies. Whereas, for example, in Uganda, we find them called generic skills. But notwithstanding, the individual proficiencies under those umbrellas are the same. And so this is one of the issues that we're confronted with, that if we continually refer to these competencies with a particular term, like 21st century skills, we sometimes risk the possibility that we'll miss some of those organisations, countries or individuals who are actually interested in exactly the same thing, but they just don't talk about it in the same way. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. So on the next slide, which is headed Attitudes and Perspectives of Education Stakeholders, you can see a few hexagons. And this continues my theme here of trying to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So first of all, if you look at the hexagons on the left-hand side, we can see all of these different education stakeholders in any given country. We've got the parents and students, we have non-government organisations and entities, trainers, i.e. Colleges and universities, we have the teachers themselves, and we have the general community. And then we've got central education systems, and of course there are private providers as well. So even though we might at a formal level within a national education system have consensus on the proficiencies that we're interested in, there remains this main issue that there's variability in how the proficiencies are perceived by each of these stakeholder groups, how they're defined and understood, and most importantly, how they're valued. And we know that within any given country, even if a national education system espouses a particular group or set of competencies, those competencies aren't equally valued and recognised by the other sectors. And so again, back in around 2017, we did some deeper work in South Africa, Mexico, and the Philippines, where we could see very clearly that parents and students, for example, thought differently about some of these competencies than did teachers. Teachers thought about them quite differently from some of the central policymakers and so on. And so one of the big issues here is around social norms, cultural norms, educational norms within any given country. And we need to work much more consciously and deliberately to try to bring all of these on board. And again, in the work that I'm doing with Alive, this is something that this consortium or initiative is very, very much attuned to, and such that they are reaching out constantly to each of these major stakeholder groups, because without a common understanding and valuation of the competencies, it means that there are contradictions between what the education system is trying to implement and what the community is ready to pick up on. And this goes to having implications for matters like focus on examinations, as opposed to, very simplistically, a focus on learning. Not only do we need to get that alignment within country across stakeholders, we need to think about the alignment within the actual central education system. And so now going over to the right-hand side here, what you can see are these areas that I often talk about: pedagogy, assessment and curriculum, and of course policy. That within any education system, we need to get all three of these arms and the overarching policy arm all attuned and understanding that each of those have a responsibility to understand and interpret the competencies and values in such a way that they can all support each other. Because we know very clearly that just sticking a term into a curriculum is not going to make a difference. What we need is to make sure that the teachers understand what those competencies or proficiencies are so that they can model those in the classroom. We need to make sure that the assessment experts are understanding the actual nature of the skills in such a way that they can develop assessment tasks that are usable not only at national level, maybe in examinations, but also model to teachers how they can put assessment tasks together. And we need to have the teacher training institutions tuned in also to these new additions to curriculum so that the teacher training actually takes into consideration these competencies. And again, within these three countries, we can see very deliberate steps to try to look after each of those areas of work. So where does that take us? If we look at the next slide, we've got these blockers that I've been referring to. And on the left-hand side, again, you can just see a summary, really, of all of these different terms in the vertical labelling, all these different sort of terms or ways of categorising all these different terms that we use for this breadth of skills perspective. And the lack of agreement about how we refer to these is a blocker in its own right. And so that's why I think we find more and more countries moving to using specific skills, specific values, specific competencies as a way of overcoming this issue of terminology more generally. However, beyond those terminology issues, we have these other blockers on the right-hand side. And just for a change in presentation, here I'm not talking about teacher capacity. We know that teachers need to understand the skills, learn them, and be able to model them. But I think that sometimes there's too much emphasis on teacher capacity as though it's all the onus and the responsibility is on them. The reality is that we have to have systems supporting the total integration. And unfortunately, what we see is inadequate preparation in terms of infrastructure. So if we look at the curriculum materials, the textbooks, going to, of course, NISM's focus, curriculum materials are typically not updated because we're incorporating the goal of generic skills or competencies into curriculum. The curriculum materials are typically the same as they've been for many, many years. So until a textbook reflects some of the nature and the goals behind these breadth of skills, it's going to be very difficult for teachers to implement in the classroom or for learners to learn and value the same competencies that we're talking about. The other big issue is around classroom space and design. And so we can see in some countries that there is more of an attempt to give space to children and learners to move around in the classroom, to sit in different groups and so on. This, of course, is made very, very difficult when you have very large numbers of students in a very small space. But this is one of the big blockers that somehow we need to solve. It's a problem. It's a wicked problem that we need to solve. And so we have aspirations that are calling for us to allow people to work together more, to question, to move around, not always have the teacher as the focus in the classroom, but we need to be thinking about how do we design our classroom space in order to facilitate that, and how do we design it in that way when we are faced with such limitations in infrastructure. And then, of course, we have the issue that I referred to on the previous slide about this need for alignment, that we need to ensure that those responsible for assessment, for teacher training, for delivery of pedagogical updating of training in classrooms, as well as a change in education culture, reflects these overarching goals. So we have a lot of things that we need to be moving along with. And I'm going to finish on this note, but just on the last slide, which is just a signature slide, to say, I know that I'm talking about the limitations, the blockers, and all the rest of it, but the reality is that countries are moving ahead. And we can see many countries now where previously maybe the Examinations Council and the Curriculum Development Corporation or Commission and teacher training did not talk together. Increasingly, we are seeing that these groups are coming together and that they're understanding that what they do in their own area has implications for others. And so I'm constantly hearing now, most recently from Uganda, where we've been talking to the assessment groups, yes, we can do this, but what that means is we need to show the teachers how to do it. So there is a very, very conscious and deliberate shift and recognition that those responsible for each of the education delivery arms needs to work across those arms. So at that level, I'm really pretty positive about how we're moving. I know that change is a long time. We're not going to see it very, very quickly, but we can see very, very clear steps toward that goal. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esther. Although we have a smaller group than what we had yesterday, but I've already received more than what I received yesterday. We have some pertinent questions that will entertain and stimulate a great conversation after Ms. Burju's presentation. So as I said earlier, we're going to move with Ms. Burju's presentation, and then we'll hold a Q&A session right after that, and then after the Q&A session, then we will project the video that was interrupted yesterday. So Ms. Burju's presentation is connected to cell and how to create regenerative, restorative, multicultural worlds that are deeply connected to nature. She is also going to talk about what to expect in ERI's information on policy briefs and preparation entitled Cell for Earth Kinship, which discusses potential domains of integration in the international, national, regional, and local education policies and brings together good practices in education from different regions of Turkey. The discussions of domains are based on intersectionality and the good practices that are based on plural versatility, and we appeal to tricksters such as degrowth, centrism, diffraction, and nature culture that persistently criticize the norms. However, we will depart from the overrated, overemphasized, and overutilized notion of critique that discards reading with care and lacks ethical practices. So the floor is yours, Burju. Do you want to go ahead and test if you're able to share your screen? And then we can go from there.
Yes, thank you. Let me briefly introduce myself, which organization that I'm working for.
Sure,
hello. And I have a unfortunately weak connection because I'm now in Cyprus and from the northern part. There is a connection. But I work for an independent, not-for-profit think and do tank. So what we basically do is we monitor education and in the region, and we actually invite people to discuss with sound evidence, practical dialogue, and innovative critical thinking. So what we have done basically over the last few years is that in Turkey, there was a big discussion on educational reforms. And there was a participation in OECD's social emotional learning research. Turkey participated. Thus, we wanted to really discuss with several different concepts. There's a problem with my connection, but I will continue. I would like to. Sorry, can you hear me
clearly? And now we can also see presentation.
Great. So this is a presentation what we have been discussing with social emotional learning for it. There are several discussions on frameworks which one to use. And my organization is focusing on Earth planetizenship or Earth kinship, you may say. And here is the discussion document that we have been introducing to Turkey with different experts from all around Turkey. So our standing point starts from the planetary boundaries that were crossed. As you can see, this is the status of the Earth now, Stockholm Resilience Institute, and there is an urgent need for action, and current ongoing environmental education or social emotional learning aspects in Turkey, whether on the policy level or implementation level, it's not enough to have this urgent action, unfortunately. We are warming up and we are losing the diversity, the souls, the other entities that we share this planet. And current students, current young people, children, actually, they are facing unfortunate and unforeseen incidents as a result to this status of the earth. And thus, almost all the research that we have been running in Turkey reflects the anxiety, particularly eco-anxiety, and thus the importance of self for earth kinship or for this urgent action is being much more critical currently. What we have been discussing in Turkey is that it's not only the global warming, but there is this child rights crisis and education crisis as well. So we need to rethink social emotional learning or any other frameworks to strengthen, to empower all citizens of this earth in relation to that. So I start now the discussing points that we have been following for the last 3 years. First, there was a huge understanding of universal learning in Turkey, unfortunately, and we discussed that there is no one world, there are different worlds. So it is inevitable to prepare the education system not for a universal understanding, but more diverse understanding that can help us learn from indigenous or local communities and from planet itself. As we are in multiple crises, as you can see, in types of multiple crisis, our main question is that through social emotional learning, how can we build worlds, not a world, not a universal world, where humans care for each other, for the other, and all beings actually. So currently, there is a weak strategy within SAL discussions in Turkey regarding this. This question hasn't been asked at all, and thus we think that if we ever integrate social emotional learning in all systems, all levels of education system or any child protection system, I would say, it is critical to start with this question. What is our role as humanity in the effort to sustain our only home, our planet, as you can see that we are facing, and we will face multiple crises. This is the current status of all social emotional learning and environmental education or other education aspects. I'm quoting from Kate Wright, which reflects that we are unaware of how our Earth is actually running, how it is evolving. Thus, actually, even if these students, if these young people knew and understand, if they had Earth kinship, I would say, then they would really understand that they need to run away immediately because there will be a lightning strike which struck them, unfortunately. So the solutions that we are currently implementing in Turkey, that to actually decrease the connection, loss connection between human and nature, but the projects that have been running actually have unforeseen consequences and hidden agenda. So we start with thinking, with walking, with discussing with several concepts and tricksters, which I will introduce briefly. And I believe that both Turkey and in the region and in international communities, it is highly important for us to discuss and to develop frameworks of SAL by asking questions with these concepts and tricksters. One is eco-social literacy, which reflects the importance of SAL actually on developing eco-social literacy. Because as you can see, in order to develop empathy, embracing sustainability as a community practice and making the invisible visible, anticipating unintended consequences and understanding how nature sustains life, SAL is a critical element of achieving eco-social literacy if we ever want to survive on this planet. According to Lanza, connection to nature has a significant positive association with overall SAL skills, and nature connection is related to, there is more evidence now that reflects nature connection related to self-awareness, self-management, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making, which we as humans and our planet needs urgently. So in order to regenerate kinship with planet Earth, we started asking questions: how can we place learning from our planet at the heart of our education system and self? How can we ensure through education that development is not seen as economic development, but also as active and meaningful participation of people in social life? And how can we transform the growth-oriented approach first into downsizing approach, justly, and then into a balanced approach, just as our planet has achieved? So it is critical that we develop more inclusive forms of caring, not only for the other human societies, but also to other animals and plants and all other beings, that I would say. So what we focus on is that to transform education goals from active citizenship to active planet citizenship. But in order to do that, we really need several concepts and tricksters to change the status quo that has been ruling educational systems and SAL, especially in Turkey. The kinship, what we mean is kinship is that organizing different kinds of unusual kinship that you never thought before against the destruction that some humans cause, actually. It's not through lineage, understanding kinship, not through lineage, but through chains of alliances, like we do here in terms of what we are discussing SAL. It's not inherited, but invented, built, and performed on purpose. It's not where we set out from, but where we arrive. Yani, kinship with other beings, kinship with the other societies, kinship with the ones that we think we can never come together. That's what we need to come together in terms of in these crisis times. So what we mean by one world growth, in the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned the universal understanding of education, or SAL, let's say, but there is no one world. We're not living in a single universe. And but current universal definitions that what we see define a type of student, a type of teacher, a type of curriculum. But on the planet, there is no universal child, there is no universal curriculum. So we exert incredible power to create a universal definition of the child, which is actually an unfortunate effort. So we create an average typology of children for the whole country in Turkey while producing educational policies for them. We develop an understanding of education that will be valid for the whole country, which is impossible based on this typology. And since it is not possible, we see that a considerable number of children are pushed out of the structure, and then we give huge effort to address with different projects to include these children that will be pushed out again, because in the first place the problem and it continues. So to really understand that we live in a world with many worlds, so there should be universal understanding. And to make ecological relationship visible in education, it is critical that to understand the edge effect of permaculture. And we need decentralization rather than unifying education strategies. Here, preventive and restorative role of education is critical, and several academicians and experts on this really invites us to rethink education, and I'm inviting us to in Turkey to discuss SAL, to rethink SAL on a changing planet. I'm already mentioned it. I will pass this. Sorry. One critical concept which we call trickster is the degrowth discussions that are going on all around Turkey. currently, with all, we are discussing the SDGs in Turkey, and the academicians and the experts really discuss that the current implementation of SDGs are weak sustainable models, and that they won't let us to urgent action that we all need. And one of the reasons is that the current education system is mainly guided by the growth-based economy, but it doesn't lead us to understand the root causes of sustainability. So actually, there are causes of unsustainability and the barriers to sustainability. And that's why SAL is particularly important to overcome barriers and embrace change. And the growth discussions, although they are still going on, we believe that they may help us to rethink SAL, rethink education system accordingly. One other critical trickster that we call to change the status quo of the education system in Turkey is this centrismlessness. That's what we call. Aykut Çoban is an expert from Turkey, and currently what we discuss is that we place ecocentrism when we discuss anthropocentrism. But he argues that these two approaches, one placing human beings and the other ecosystems at the center of the debate, positions human and nature in opposition to each other. Doing so can trigger human nature duality, so which will take us in a loop. Without looking at center, without prioritizing human and nature alone, can we focus on the interactions between human and nature in all areas of SAL? This is one of the critical discussions. One other concept that we focus is the diffraction of Karen Barad. She is a physicist and philosophist. It is important that while discussing SAL, we are not trying to aim to decrease the current SAL discussions. But rather, we need to read with care, committing to this, not dismissing, eliminating, putting someone or something down, not subtracting, distancing and othering. Rather, actually, we look for differences that make difference, not unifying, not always coming to a common ground. Here, nature culture approach can help us because this approach abandons deliberately created distinction between nature and human beings, recognizing that human beings and nature are not opposites, but that human beings are nature. So here there is unity, but unity for nature and culture, not distancing. I will briefly explain the current status of SAL in Turkey as well, and then I will end my discussion. There's a decline in life satisfaction at age 15 in Turkey, comparing age 10. And there is significant differences between the social and emotional skills of boys and girls. It is highly related, closely related to socioeconomic status, unfortunately. This is the problem of our region, maybe I would say. Anxiety is high at age 15, and we have a particular eco-anxiety that came up in the latest research, and it's quite high. And students, young people and children, unfortunately, doesn't believe in any future, and they're at age 15. That's why actually we found really important to discuss SAL, to integrate SAL in our education systems as a critical aspect. But while doing so, we wanted to not to make the mistakes that has been done with environmental education or sustainability education in Turkey. Thus, we wanted to discuss the basic philosophy, the basic aims that are there already that cause us problems. That's why we believe that the discussing the tricksters, as we call, could be important for us while reframing SAL or any other education. Sorry for my English, but I hope I made myself a bit clear. Thank you.
Your point is really clear. Thank you so much, Ms. Burcu. I do have a list of questions for you as well. We'll get started with Dr. Esther, and then I will open the floor after I go through the questions I personally have and the questions I received directly from the chat. Open the floor, see if anybody wants to directly ask a question. All you need to do is unmute your mic. You may turn your camera on if you wish to do so, and ask away. So I'll start, Dr. Esther Kerr. You brought you talked about a crucial point in implementation, and you talked about curriculum. And I wanted personally to know, looking at curriculum from the perspective of the implemented, the intended, and the enacted curriculum, how does that, the difference between the implemented, the enacted curriculum, and the intended one, create a problem in implementation, especially with these countries and how they integrate CEL into formal education? Is there a disalignment or misalignment between these three aspects of curriculum implementation?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yes, I could just say yes, and that's the answer to the question. But so I guess one of the things we learned with social emotional thinking and learning is we shouldn't ask closed questions, because some students will just take the opportunity to say yes or no. But I think that is precisely the problem that we're seeing. So what we have in terms of the intentions at policy level, not well translated into curriculum, not well translated into the expectations of school leadership and teachers, and then of course it cannot be implemented. And so we actually looked specifically at this matter in Kenya about 4 or 5 years ago, where we were just looking for understanding about competencies, core competencies. And the gaps between what were intended by policymakers to what was understood by school leaders and what was understood by teachers were phenomenal. At the same time, I've got to say that was sort of in the early days of them introducing core competencies. And I know Grace Minor is among the participants here. She could possibly talk about those gaps a lot more informedly than I can do. But they are precisely the issues that we're dealing with, because we're in early days and there will always be gaps between what is intended when you're trying to bring in new major change. So I don't know whether Grace might like to comment on, particularly on that Kenya issue, because I'm sure they've come a long way since those days.
Ms. Grace, would you like to comment?
Actually, I can't see her anymore, so maybe she's not here.
Yeah, maybe she was here earlier.
Yeah, okay. So we'll leave that. Yeah. But,
yes.
Yeah.
So I'll take few questions. I'll ask my personal questions after I go through. I want to make sure that I do take care of the questions I received through the directly, and then the ones in the chat. I know Oliver was really interested to attend this session. She wants to learn. East African countries are taking efforts to help students thrive, but new challenges emerge as they are solving the previous ones. Example, in Tanzania, fee-free education has led to surge in classrooms. The government is constructing new classes, but again, there is a need of new teachers. All these challenges affect teachers and students emotionally. How could you implement CEL in such situations effectively?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Olive, was it? I think your questions are almost unanswerable for me. The reality is that teachers are confronting such challenges. I mean, I understand your point about Tanzania. The same thing, though, is happening in many countries where we have explosion of youth. We have more children entering formal education systems because, to some extent, the global initiatives have worked. We're getting more and more children into education, and of course there are more and more children being born, and so this is putting major pressures on the education sector. And it's true that in some countries, I'm not saying this is true of Tanzania, But in some countries, they are not accordingly putting more resources into education. So the percentage of their GDP that goes into education is not necessarily changing in terms of overall percentages. And so naturally, there are problems with that. And of course, you have the social emotional issues that have arisen during COVID, and now again with many teachers back in classrooms having to deal with different and new problems by virtue of absence, at least in some countries. You know, if you have few teachers having major social emotional issues at the moment, it would be very nice to think, well, this whole movement towards social emotional competence should be able to enable them and empower them so that they learn to get through that and they model that behaviour to young people. But that's assuming major resilience on the part of these teachers, and I think that's probably an unfair expectation. So I'm afraid I don't have an answer to this question. I know, and it goes to the question that was raised earlier in the chat too, about, you know, what are the expectations of teachers? What is it that motivates teachers? And I mean, I think that's as many causes and factors as there are people. We're each motivated in somewhat different ways. But I know that one of the problems that many teachers face when they're expected to implement something new is, number one, their own lack of knowledge or understanding about that because they haven't been given appropriate training, their lack of confidence in what they do know, and therefore reverting to traditional roles, and the uneven backdrop that if you have some teachers within a school or within a system who understand very clearly what is needed, but if they are in a minority, it's very difficult for them to act in a school in such a way that they can represent a new mode of thinking and being. Because if we're talking about bringing social, emotional, and generic cognitive competencies into the classroom, that means a change in teaching mode. It means a change in teacher pedagogy. And there are some systems where traditional ways of interacting with students in classrooms are the accepted norm, and some people don't see the need to change that. For example, just a couple of weeks ago, I was working in Nepal and interviewing some teachers there. So Nepal, just like many countries, are wanting to implement what they call soft skills, but again, it's the same thing as we're talking about here. And some within the Nepali curriculum, they've actually made quite good strides in terms of the grade 1 to 3 curriculum, which they call an integrated curriculum, where they've integrated a lot more of these soft skills. So teachers are being trained in bringing this into the curriculum, but they say that when they go back to their schools and they try to teach and run classes in a way that facilitates and nurtures these skills, they are sometimes called out of the classroom by the school leadership saying, why aren't you teaching in a way that we expect, which is you need to get all of these students rote learning and memorising in the long-term preparation for exams through the system. And so you have a little bit of a dissonance between where the country wants to go and where a majority of teacher and leadership might still sit. And so this is one of the big issues, I think, that many teachers are confronted with. And of course, going back to this original question, would add to more stress for those teachers who understand that they do want to move in a new direction, but they're finding that the infrastructure is not facilitating that for them.
Thank you, Dr. Esther. I know, so we answered by that, we answered, you've provided a comprehensive look at both Oliver's question and also Dr. Nezi elaborate on, you mentioned that the study mentions progress in East Africa, but also refers to similar findings in Asia in the past decade. Could you outline some similarities or differences between the challenges faced by these two distinct regions concerning competency-based curriculum integration?
Yes. So quite a lot of the work that I was doing before I became so much more involved here in Africa was in Asia, which is sort of, I guess, Australia's backyard. A backyard is a great thing in Australia, so that doesn't mean it's a negative place. It's where people play and socialise and all sorts of things. So from about 2013 onward, there was quite a lot of research across Southeast Asia and the Asia Pacific in looking at what they referred to as transversal competencies. And again, transversal competencies are typically the same things that we're talking about under 21st century skills or a core competencies banner. And across about 13, 14 countries in Asia, we looked at the matters of definition and understanding of the skills. We looked at teacher understandings of the skills and what they were doing in classrooms. And we looked at what was happening in assessment. And what was identified, and there are some publications on this, were again the major blockers. And the major blockers were things like a clear understanding of the competencies and how they might be translated into classroom performance and behaviour. So that really was the primary blocker. The lack of infrastructure and so on just followed on from that, because again, in those days, I think that this understanding that we talk about a lot now about needing alignment between curriculum, assessment and pedagogy, that wasn't so well understood or was not so explicit anyway in those times. And so we saw these different silos or ivory towers in a sense that weren't speaking to each other and didn't understand that when you're making a wholesale pedagogical and aspirational change, you need all aspects, all education delivery arms to come together. And so I think that in Asia was a big problem at that time. I think now that this understanding of alignment is much more explicit and taken into consideration in many countries. And so I think now we're seeing the differences between Asia and Africa are not as great as I think they might have been at that time. What I have noticed in my work in Africa, which is across these three countries, as well as a little bit in DRC and the Gambia and Zambia, is a great deal more willingness to work across those delivery arms. So I think in Asia, maybe they were more siloed than they are here in East Africa. I think there's a much greater willingness to work across the agencies or the ministry departments that I see happening here.
That's quite an interesting difference between these two regions. So based on the measures or the specific measures that you have been observing in East Africa, and they have indicated similar challenges to the findings that you had in Asia, how does the need for competency-based education evolves and improves once you look at these challenges in place and you look at the implication and the application? How do you improve or tailor these soft skills, competency-based skills, in order to respond to these challenges? Especially, you talked about this misalignment between, or how we need to have pedagogy, curriculum, teacher training, all attuned to this common goal.
I think that the problem is that many countries just sort of, I won't say unthinkingly, but just think, oh, well, we need to have our kids be good problem solvers and we need them to be able to empathise with others. And somehow think that that's the whole story, that somehow it's just going to magically flow through. And I think that's the big issue. It's about the initial lack of deep understanding of how these changes are going to impact right throughout the system. And so that's one aspect. The other, I guess my solution to that is that once we can get that recognition from policymakers, that if they're going to change the aspirations for a country, they need to think beyond just saying to the curriculum people, integrate it, assessment, just integrate it, without understanding that it's a wholesale change. That's the issue. But once that's understood, I think that the countries can learn a great deal from each other. I mean, I think that what we know now that we didn't know 10 years ago was that there were a whole lot of different templates or approaches that we can use to get through it. And so countries can learn from each other in that way. On the other hand, although we might be able to take similar approaches procedurally to make sure that understandings siphon through everything, we need to understand that each country is different. And that's again made incredibly clear through the ALIVE process, which is that here in East Africa there's been a very explicit self-conscious focus on we are these three countries, we think in a certain way, we understand things in a certain way. And yes, we can benefit from all of these different procedures and approaches, but they need to, those processes need to respect our contextual understanding of these skills and how we will implement them into our schools. And so I think that this experience, at least for me here in East Africa, is incredibly valuable because it says, yes, we can undertake some of the findings that we've seen in other regions, but they need to be contextualized to how we think about these competencies and proficiencies. And so the three countries here put a lot of time and effort into redefining, re-understanding the nature of these competencies in order to understand how they
لو تيسر للسيد الموسى أن يسمع هذا الكلام فأريد أن أشير إليه. أنا أحد أبناء هذا القطاع منذ أكثر
السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم. مالك كتغوت هضر غير بشوية الحمد لله كي داير انت بخير؟ لاباس عليك؟ الحمد لله بارك الله فيك. مم، 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 مم. مزيان. مم، مم. حيت درتي اللي قلتي بالنسبة للموظفين ما خصهمش يكون أثر رجعي، لأن غادي من بعد يترتب عليها ما عرف شي حاجة ما فهمتش أنا. مم، مم، مم. أها. إيه إيه. مم، مم، مم. كتر. مم. نفتنا بشي شوية. مم.
Children being at school. So it's not some impact that there will be in the future.
مم.
We are facing it now, but the problem
Yeah.
is that we don't have the knowledge that we are facing it now. Actually, the media or all other issues are integrated into this. That's why while we are discussing education rights, cell discussions in relation to education rights in crisis
مم.
age era, let's say, media literacy or other literacies are highly important as well. So let me see your question here.
مم.
If you can write on the chat, I can answer.
Yes.
2 weeks ago, we did a
مم.
good practices in education conference
Yeah,
in Turkey,
well,
where we gathered all good practices,
لا
including
ولكن
cell and
في
partnership
سميتو
relation
المادة
from all around
كنظن
Turkey.
الثالثة
Stuff what is there already, what is
كتحسن
our
في هذا
power,
الموضوع، لأن
and how
كتقول
can
أن
we learn
التدبير
from there
ديال
in relation
الموظفين
to
ماشي هو التدبير
the
هو التدبير ديالهم
we want to go.
المركزي وداكشي اللي كان
One
عندهم
critical thing
مكتسبات
is that one
هذوك
critical thing
الأطباء
is
هما اللي
we
غادي
need
يبقى
to
يكون
be
هاد
in
التدبير
solidarity.
الجديد اللي دخل
None of
دابا
the
جديد هو اللي
organizations or
غادي
none of
يسري
the
عليه.
teachers can face this alone. So it needs to be a whole system approach, whether in the school or in the region, in the city, in the country. Let's say this is also important as well. That's why we did a conference
لا
on
ما
best
يخرجوش
practices
لا
in
ما
education,
يخرجوش
and
غيبقاو في الوظيفة العمومية حتى
entitled
ينقرضوا.
Planetizenship, and there is a
هذا هو
section
اللي
on
كاين
cell.
دابا تما، حتى المادة 4
We wanted
اللي
to really
كتقول أنه
understand
يسري هادشي،
what is
يسري على
in our
الموارد
hands, how
البشرية
can we
نظام ديال
disseminate
الوظيفة
the knowledge
العمومية
that was there already.
إلا ما يتعارض مع هذا
Develop
المرسوم، وراه كيفتح
discussion
الباب لهاد
centers of
المسألة هادي.
fraction.
كيقول لك زعما الآخرين غادي
In Turkey,
يبقاو
for
تابعين
example,
الوظيفة،
the
لا
philosophy of
كيبقاو تابعين
education
الوظيفة
is
العمومية،
currently
والآخرين هما
based
اللي
on
ما يبقاوش.
anthropocentric.
وهذيك هي اللي كيبغيو يلعبوا
It
بها
reflects the
باش يقولوا بلي حتى أطول الأكاديمية
difference
تدخلوا
of
للوظيفة العمومية، واخا ما
culture and
كيصرحوش بها، ولكن
superiority
كيقولوا ها
of
زعما راه
nature.
المادة
And I
هذيك
believe
راه
that
كتضمن
this
لهم
is a
هادشي.
barrier that we need to
ما
overcome.
كتضمنش هادشي، كتضمن غير
We want
الآخرين
to
هذوك اللي في الوظيفة
really
العمومية يبقاو في
empower
الوظيفة العمومية،
social
والآخرين
emotional learning
وطول
in
الأكاديميات هما اللي غادي
our education
لا يبقاو كلشي غيبقى هو هذاك، ما غاديش تبدل حتى حاجه، لانهم ما يمكنش يفتحوا هذه الجبهه، ما يفتحوش هذه الجبهه اللي تاع الموظفين ديالنا، ماشي لا ما لا، حيت ما ناضوش الموظفين كيقولوا كيحتجوا بواحد، كيقولوا بلي حتى حنا راه حنا مظلومين وحتى حنا راه حنا نخرجوا من الوظيفه العموميه. لا، ولكن المضربين ماشي من هذا السبب، ماشي لهذا السبب، المضربين على اسباب اخرى، ولكن هذا السبب هذا ما كانش معلن حتى من شي حد، الا كانوا افراد هكا ذكروها ولا هادشي اللي فهمت منها، كنظن هذا هو الفهم زعما كاين، حيت ما غاديش يمكن يخرجوهم، صعيب عليهم، صعيب باش يتحملوا التبعات ديال هادشي، راه كلشي غينوض داك الساعه، غينوض كلشي، ماشي غير الوظيفه هادو، غينوض كاع الموظفين ماشي غير التعليم، لان غيقولوا هادو بداو بهم هنا غيدوزو عندنا حنا، التعليم راه هذا غير مختبر. ولكن المعنى ديالها القانوني، المعنى القانوني هو هذا. لا، ملي كتربطها بمادة 3 كيوضح، كيقول لك راه مادة 3 لا واقيلا 2 و3، المهم أنا الأرقام كيمشيو ليا واش 2 ولا 3، المهم هذيك اللي كتهضر على التدبير غيكون ديال الموظفين بوحدو، ديال الأطر الأكاديميات بوحدو، والأخرى اللي كتقول أنه هاد يسري على الوظيفة العمومية، توحيد زعما المسارات، توحيد المسارات، وهذا هو اللي توحيد المسارات، وانه ملي كيدخل ملي كيترسم صافي كيولي بحال الاخر من ناحيه ديال الحقوق، من ناحيه الواجبات، غير الاختلاف في التدبير، الاخر مدبر مركزيا والاخر مدبر جهويا، وما يترتب عن ذاك التدبير. وهاد الامور خصهم يوضحوها هما اطر الاكاديميات، ممكن هذا الشيء ممكن دابا هما هادشي خصهم يوضحوه، دابا هادشي ما كيوضحوش هما، كيخليوه غامض، كيلعبوا على الغموض، وهاد الغموض في النهايه ما ولاش لصالحهم، لانهم بغاو يمشيو في ديك القضيه ديال الغموض. خصك توضح هادشي كله. لا شفتها، انا كنت جاوبت، كنت صيفطتها لي جاوبت.
Disciplines are in silos, there is no connection with them, and when there is, for example, when there is a discussion on social emotional learning, they mainly go to the social sciences and they don't think as a whole, and it is the same for math as well. I mean, math is in Turkish as well, math is in social sciences as well, math is in music as well, so that's why this fragmentation and the centeredness of
شتي هذيك الصورة اللي صيفط لك؟ قناة الحريرة. قناة الحريرة. ما قاريش القانون هذا، ولكن راه فيه التحفيز. راه كاينه في الاخر، هو الاخر كاع ما فيه. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله.
Within a time frame that is actually less than we expected.
We have so many other questions for you, Ms. Burju. I put them on directly in the chat if you would like to. I have a question from Dr. Bernard a little bit earlier, and then we'll answer the question from Dr. Naji, and then you can go over the last questions that I just put in the chat. So you can go.
There are 3 questions.
So there is a question.
والأحكام الانتقالية كتكون أحكام انتقالية.
UNESCO's updated recommendation for peace, human rights, and sustainable development clearly makes the link between peace and sustainable development. One cannot happen without the other. What is your opinion and your view?
I completely agree with it.
Mm.
Currently, I'm living in a country. My north is Ukraine, my south is uh, Palestine, Israel, and
Mm.
the polarization
Mm.
in our region is getting higher.
Mm.
And there is a strong link definitely uh, between peace
Mm.
education,
Mm.
combating polarization in our societies, and sustainability values.
Mm.
And actually, there is no other framework rather than CEL in
Mm.
Turkey to have, that we could discuss the link
إن
between
شاء الله.
sustainability and
شو المرة
peace.
10 أكتوبر
Completely agree. The framework of
صرت
UNESCO
ترك واقيلا
and the notion of UNESCO is less
واقيلا
known in
صرت ترك
Turkey, unfortunately. But with these questions that I shared with you, we wanted to
واخا المرة
impact education agenda in
عندي
Turkey
واحد المؤتمر دولي
to move forwards
ديال الجبل لو كنت
towards
صيفط لك الرابط ولكن انت هادشي ديال
healing. But I don't
ديال
see this,
الإنجليزية
the
ما
questions are not visible in my chat. Can you read those to me, please?
Sure. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Could you elaborate on how the concept of
كتحترم واش اللغة
intersectionality, which
الوطنية
you did talk a little bit about, guides
واخا
the identification
واخا
of domains for
يلا
integration, and how
مزيان
pluriversality shapes the
مزيان
selection
راه
of
راه
good
المنتدى
practices
الوطني داير
from
شي حاجة
different
غدا
regions of Turkey.
غتحضر
Yeah. Well, within our Turkey, we have a high biodiversity and high cultural diversity. And actually, one of the good examples
وانت الرئيس ديالو ما عارف واش
of
كيدير
was the work that
الرئيس
we had
ديالو
done
ما
with
عارف
Roma
شنو
kids.
كيدير
Roma kids has a different topic, different understanding, different
ويلي
value set for nature. And
حتى
we
لهاد
have,
الدرجة كاع
for example,
كيفاش ما عيطولكش
they are in nature, they are living in nature, they are nomads, half nomads,
ما
semi-nomads,
تقولش
I
هادي
would say.
واحد
And
اللي كان مؤسس
the value that
للمنتدى
they bring to birds is totally different than the
هذا
value in
ايه
the education system.
اه
So, quite in several schools in the southeast part of Turkey, for example, we invited Roma
يمكن غتلفوا الارقام
elderly
ديالك
and Roma kids to share how they are linking their life with nature, how they see nature, what are their
هادو
practices,
الجداد ما
how they
كيعرفوكش
learn from nature. So integrating
الجداد ما
intersectionality towards
كيعرفوكش
plurality, different norms, different value
ايوا واخا
sets within the system
ايوا
can
واخا
help us maybe to
ايوا
change
ايوا واخا
school climate, school
ايوا
change
واخا
in our
يلا شكرا
educators to
واخا ان
understand
شاء
the
الله
value of
واخا
this nature. Then I
واخا
can
نشوف
give one
يلا واخا
example and I can share
يلا
more
شكرا
details if
معك
you want later on.
Thank you. And then if you could please elaborate, I know that Dr. Naji asked this question to both of you. I know you touched upon it a little bit. Mandela said that education is the most powerful weapon to change the world. However, the world is not working very well. Both the ecology and humanity, the weapons are the most powerful, actually changing the world by unsupportable violence. The question is how education can change the sad picture of the world in the future by changing the values and attitudes of policymakers.
Well, education cannot solve the world's problem alone. So it's just one system, but it could be a good ally because it's in Turkey, all children has the right to education. And when there is a problem in their communities, it's a kind of safe space for children that, teachers monitor, counselors monitor that their well-being. It's really highly critical. Putting aside that education cannot solve all the world's problems alone, and it is also vulnerable to what is happening all around Turkey. What we see, what we think is that how education can change the set picture, like gathering good practices, working together, but not only as schools, with NGOs, with other experts, is the only notion that we could see that there's light ahead actually. But what we say in Turkey is that school environment is the third teacher. So by being, like if you have water depository systems that actually kids can learn, and then they can bring that knowledge to their communities as well, or elsewhere, or solar power or other, they're caring other beings, that could be really a kind of good ally for the urgent action that our planet and our humanity needed.
Great, thank you. And empathy and responsibility and mindfulness and collaboration, and how today integrating these concepts is called to nurture a holistic understanding of this relationship between individuals, the natural world, and how we can foster emotional well-being while promoting sustainable practices and environmental stewardship. I would like to ask the same question to Dr. Esther before we move on to broadcasting the video that was scheduled. So, Dr. Esther, if you have one magic bullet, what would it be, or one silver bullet to overcome all these challenges? You've been doing this for over 20 years. You must have the answer.
I don't, of course. There's no magic bullet, but so I'll just reflect. Over time, I've gone through stages where I think this competency is more important than another competency, and so on. And of course, one competency alone is not going to get us anywhere. But I'll just say my favourite at the moment, rather than being a silver bullet, my favourite is perspective taking, and perspective taking is you could say it's a sub-skill of many other complex skills. So you need it for solving problems, you need it for thinking critically, you need it for empathizing, you need it for communicating in a responsive way. So for me, perspective taking, it obviously it's putting yourself in the shoes of another in order to understand what the perception of something is. And if we were all able to take another's perspective, then I would imagine that would lead to empathy. I would imagine it would lead to understanding a lot more about what motivates each of us, and through negotiation toward consensus. So I think the beauty of this taking is social emotional skills, and I think that, of course, perspective of understanding the situation of another is with it, but it's for today. This
Take and talked about empathy and how you foster this sense of empathy and responsibility around both the topics you brought to great Thank you. Now go ahead and play it. Thank you. Trinidad, please. Now, Dr. Naji, please enable the sound. We are still not able to hear. We can see the video, but we're not able to hear the video. Dr. Naji, please, we're not able to hear the video, so if you could please enable the sound. We try one more time, Dr. Naji, see if this works. Perfect, thank you.
أهلا. عليكم السلام. أهلا.
Connection. Dr. Naji is to be mindful of everybody's time. We won't be able to put the video up. We're only 10 minutes away from our break. So I would like to thank our